Hello there, you're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. A victim of a Sheffield child grooming gang has claimed a serving police officer was amongst the men who abused her. Opposition parties call for Cabinet Office Minister Sir Gavin Williamson to be sacked for a third time over claims he sent abusive text messages to the former Chief Whip. The firebombing of an immigration processing centre in Dover was motivated by extreme right-wing terrorist ideology, according to the police. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Ali Miraj and Christina Patterson. There they both are. But first, let's see what's on some of the front pages for you. Well, the Sunday Telegraph tells Chancellor Hunt's latest talks on tax plans as the politician discusses halving pension reliefs for millions of higher-rate taxpayers. Nurses across the UK vote to launch strike over pay is the lead story on tomorrow's Observer, as the biggest nursing strike in NHS history is set to take place before Christmas. Rishi's extra bank holiday for Charles is the headline in tomorrow's Sunday Express, reporting that the UK will enjoy an additional holiday to mark the King's coronation next year. Exposed reads the front of the Sunday Times. Its headline, the global hacking network that targets VIPs. It also reports on a separate story about Sir Gavin Williamson with the headline, Williamson's threatening text create headache for Sunak. While tomorrow's Sun reports that Three Lions ace Ivan Toney is at the centre of a match betting probe. The Mirror has an exclusive with Auden Carlson questioning Boy George's appearance on I'm a Celebrity, 15 years after the Culture Club singer shackled him to a wall and whipped him with a chain while screaming abuse at him. And the Daily Star warns, beware of the cockroach, next to a photo of Matt Hancock. But instead of a report on the MP's appearance on I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here, this is a story on how cockroaches could affect climate change. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by journalist and author Christina Patterson and Ali Miraj, a columnist at The Article. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Telegraph and this new tax being proposed by the Chancellor, which will affect millions of middle-class workers. Christina, you take us into this story, first of all.
Yes, well, this is obviously trying to clear up the mess from the disastrous Liz Truss libertarian experiment, which left us with arguably a 50 billion black hole. And Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak are desperately trying to come up with solutions that will not be too unpopular to solve the problem. The trouble is that most of the solutions are likely to be pretty unpopular. I mean, I think they are sensible in that they are realising it can't all be done by cuts to public services. Not least, I think, because, to be honest, I think Rishi Sunak would very happily, I mean, I don't use happily in the sense of cheerfully, but I think he's a small state politician. His instincts of a small state, and he would probably, if he thought he could get away with it, cut public services more. But he can't in the current climate because MPs won't vote for the legislation. And there are certain areas like the NHS where I'm sure he actually doesn't want to, which means you have to raise some taxes, or in this case, reduce some tax relief on pensions. So it means that higher rate taxpayers would get less pension relief, possibly halved from up to 40% to 20%, which would apparently raise between 8 and 10 billion. So who knows if they'll do that? I mean, they're having to look at all kinds of creative solutions, and I can't imagine that will go down well with a lot of Tory party members. Many of them are retired, of course, already, but those who aren't, probably quite a lot of them are higher rate taxpayers, and certainly Tory MPs will be higher rate taxpayers. So, yeah, I can't imagine it's going to go down well if it goes ahead.
Yes, and that we don't know whether it will, in fact, go ahead, but we know that discussions are ensuing regarding this. Do you think this is a good idea, Ali?
Well, I'm not sure good is probably the right word, Gillian, for this. I mean, it's an idea that's been floated. A lot of ideas in the run-up to the autumn statement on November the 17th will be floated by the government because, as Christina said, it's got a £50 billion black hole to fill. Now, that is going to involve pain. I mean, when you've got a situation where we furloughed loads of people, 11.7 million people, we borrowed 400 billion to finance various schemes in COVID, and you've got 2.4 trillion of public debt. I always thought it was absolutely fantasy economics to try and grow your way out of the problem. That taxes are going to have to go up. The thing that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt are at one on is that they realise that this has to be done in a fair manner. Therefore, you can't do it on the backs of the poor. So I think they are going to probably have to skew this to the better off. That is going to hit them probably electorally, one could argue, because a lot of their supporters will be hit by this. But they have to do the right thing. You're looking at potentially 2% public sector pay increases across the thing, which is going to go down very, very badly. You're also looking potentially at capital gains tax and the dividend tax rate also being reviewed. The pensions triple lock, I guess they probably will leave that because it was a manifesto commitment. But it's all speculation. The reality is they've got a really difficult job to do. There are no easy answers here. But finally, the adults are back in the room.
As you say, all speculation. We don't have a final decision on any of those policies being put forward for discussion. Let us have a look at The Observer. And this, a very, very worrying story. The biggest nursing strike in NHS history, the paper's reporting, is set to take place before Christmas after union officials said that large swathes of the country had voted for industrial action. Very, very worrying, Christina.
Well, very, very worrying for patients because there's already a waiting list of about 7 million people. I'm among them, actually, because I broke my knee and incurred various injuries the other day, and I'm having to wait a long time for an MRI and might need surgery and will no doubt have to wait a lot longer. So from that point of view, I probably wouldn't welcome a nurses' strike. However, I do support them because they have had, many of them have had, in effect, a 20% pay tax since the Tories took over in 2010. Their pay has not kept up with inflation, very far from it. And on top of that, the circumstances they've had to work in over the last few years have been really horrific. The stress, I've met nurses who have been utterly traumatized by the stress they've been through under COVID. In fact, I met one who was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And the stress continues. You know, people think COVID is over. It isn't. Obviously, thank goodness, with the booster, the autumn booster campaign having gone relatively well, there have been fewer people going into hospital with severe COVID, but there's a backlog of 7 million people. The strains are enormous. There's not enough funding. So I really sympathise with nurses, and I think if this is what it takes for them to get more recognition and better working conditions and a fairer pay rise, then so be it.
The government say that the average basic annual pay for nurses would increase from about £35,600 to around £37,000 from March, and that's a rise of just 4%. That's what they said at March 2022. This is set to be the first national strike in the history of the Royal College of Nursing, Ali. I mean, this is really not what the Prime Minister wants in his in tray, is it?
No, it's not. And it's a horrendous situation that the government's got to deal with. And it's not only nurses, it's also rail workers, postal workers, rubbish collectors. I mean, you could be having strikes writ large across the public sector in the run-up to Christmas, a complete nightmare scenario for the government. And I do have some sympathy with the government here because, well, look, we've got 10% inflation. People are struggling out there. It's really, really hard to make a crust and to make a living. A lot of people have seen their, in the public sector, have seen their real wages falling for the past 10 years, and they've had enough. And so the government, you know, it's got to react. But the reality is that it's got limited options. I mean, we've just been talking about tax increases. The only way to do this is to tax the rich more. And the problem here is fundamentally, and this has been building up in my view for a long time now, and I speak as a capitalist, I think the capitalist system is going to fall in on itself unless there is more of a move towards redistribution at the moment. Yes, in the long term, we should be moving towards supply side reforms and growth. But at the moment, people are really struggling. And you've got 50,000 vacancies in the nursing vacancies in the NHS right now. My own mother was an NHS doctor for 40 years. So I yield to no one in my admiration for the NHS, but it is really tough out there. And then on top of this, you've got, in some cases, people waiting for ambulances for over 2 days to arrive because there are shortages of workers all over the place. It's a really, really difficult situation. Christina says 7 million waiting list. Yes, and rising. And the other issue is social care is not being resolved either because you've got bed blocking in hospitals. And Rishi Sunak had, to be fair to him, increased the national insurance by 1.25%, which was then reversed by Liz Truss. Now he's probably not going to march his MPs up the hill again to go and restore it. But at least that was a step in the right direction. You want proper public services, they've got to be funded properly.
Christina, to the Express, and the Home Secretary, the headline there is on a mission. Major crackdown on bogus claims as Tories tackle migrants crisis. And we read that she's planning a shake-up of how asylum requests are processed, and those that are found to be bogus, that those people be kicked out quickly.
Oh, where does one start with Cruella Braverman? I mean, she's saying the system is broken. Who has been in charge of the system for the last 12 years? Does she think it's Labour? No, it isn't Labour. The system is a mess. The backlog is absolutely incredible. Of the people who arrived on small boats last year, I think 95% have not had their claims processed. So it might be 90%, but it's an incredibly high percentage. I mean, that's ridiculous. And in the meantime, she's moaning about putting them up in hotels. Well, look at the cost to the taxpayer of having people here for years at the taxpayer's expense. It's absolutely ridiculous. They, and Liz Truss's refusal to say that Emmanuel Macron was a friend, when she said the jury's out on whether he's a friend or foe. Well, of course, the French were not going to increase their cooperation at that point. I mean, this is a very complex problem, and poverty is at the root of it because most people in the world, particularly young men from poorer countries, a very high proportion of them would understandably want to come to our relatively rich and free country. Nobody could blame them for that. But many of them are using illegal routes. They are paying smugglers, and then they are claiming either asylum or, in the case of many of the young Albanian men who are disappearing at an enormous rate, they are claiming human trafficking or slavery status. Now, again, I don't think one can blame them for wanting to get a better future, but we can't just let them sit here in hotels and at the taxpayer's expense. This is a very complicated issue, and Suella Braverman's posturing and rhetoric and her really, really nasty language talking about an invasion, about people who are poor and want a better life, is deeply unhelpful.
Christina.
I mean, actually, we have a massive skills shortage. We should be sorting out a visa system so people can come and work here and trying to sort out the boats. It's
Christina,
ridiculous.
we must leave it there just because we've got to go to the break, but we're going to come back and continue with some other papers. Coming up, we've got more headaches for Rishi as the Prime Minister refused last night to say if he had confidence in Sir Gavin Williamson after it emerged he sent threatening and expletive-laden texts to a female colleague. Stay with us for more on that. Are watching the press preview. Still with me, Christina Patterson, journalist and author, and Ali Miraj, columnist at The Article. Welcome back to both of you. Let us have a look at the Sunday Times and this story about allegations against Sir Gavin Williamson. Take us into this, Ali.
Well, this is an expletive-ridden text that Gavin Williamson sent the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, apparently something to do with the fact that he was not invited to the Queen's funeral, and then apparently blamed her for this. So he was very upset about it and very angry. Now, there's a question mark around whether Rishi Sunak should have ever brought Gavin Williamson back. Remember, he was very hapless as Education Secretary, the algorithm and all that other stuff that he oversaw. I mean, to be fair to him, it was never an easy task, but certainly he didn't really handle it perhaps the best way he could have. But the argument is, should Rishi Sunak have been brought him back as a Cabinet Office Minister Look, that's an issue for the Prime Minister to deal with here. I mean, certainly you can't be sending expletive-ridden texts to a colleague, however useless and inept that colleague is. And the fact of the matter is that Wendy Morton, by all accounts, was utterly out of her depth as Chief Whip. You could see that in the fracking vote that took place, where no one knew where they were coming or going. People were being manhandled, supposedly, in tears. It was a shambles. So whilst I don't agree with Gavin Williamson or defend those actions, I think Wendy Morton was utterly useless as Chief Whip.
But, Christina, if Sir Gavin Williamson was sacked, this would be the third time.
Yes. I mean, the fact that we have to call him Sir is so utterly ridiculous. I mean, that was, again, a reward for loyalty, which seems to be the key criterion these days for those kinds of honours, at least from government. I mean, I have to say, it's a pretty unsalubrious spectacle to see when these WhatsApp messages get released into the public gaze, and you see the kind of language that MPs use to each other, but that colleagues use to each other. I've worked in, on Fleet Street or its modern equivalent for many years, and we didn't use that kind of language to each other, at least not most of the time. It seems to be quite habitual. Just the rudeness and the sense of entitlement. And as you say, Gillian, he has been sacked twice before for major misbehaviour. He was, I think, the worst education secretary ever. So he is neither competent nor pleasant. I can only assume he's in the cabinet because, to use that awful cliche, he knows where the bodies are buried. And Rishi Sunak probably felt he was safer inside the cabinet than out of it. But he can't stay, and nor can Suella Braverman. And, if I were a betting person, I would probably put money on them both being gone before too long.
Too long as in this year?
Look, I've got no idea. I mean, every prediction I ever make is generally wrong. But I think I can't imagine that Gavin Williamson will stay much longer. And I think, given Suella Braverman's propensity for enormous errors, which she repeats and claims that they are accidental when they're clearly very deliberate, I can't see her lasting that long either. I wouldn't be surprised if they were both gone by the end of the year.
Ali, tell us about the extra bank holiday that we are going to have to mark the coronation of Charles III.
Yes, this is on May the 8th. We know that the coronation is going to take place on a Saturday, which is, I think, what Prince Charles wanted. He wanted minimal fuss. He wants a slimmed-down monarchy. He's also very well aware of the cost involved in this. He does not want a complete fanfare for his coronation. He wants a respectful event, of course. He's been waiting 70 years for the job of the longest apprenticeship in history, so it should be marked properly in a dignified manner. But he also understands the pressures people are under with the cost of living crisis. So I think he wants something that is fitting. But Rishi Sunak, I think, is doing absolutely the right thing. It is a moment in the nation's history. It's the first time in most of our lifetimes that this will have occurred. And I think it's absolutely fitting that we do have a bank holiday to mark it on the Monday.
Christina, to the Daily Star, their headline, "Beware of the Cockroach," which is actually a story about cockroaches, but they seem to have pictured Matt Hancock.
Yes, I mean, there's not much evidence for what the story is actually about beyond the fact that apparently insects are endangering the planet. But since absolutely everything is endangering the planet at the moment, it's hard to blame one particular species. But yes, I have to say that the prospect, I mean, not that I'll watch it, obviously, but the prospect of Matt Hancock not only eating cockroaches or whatever he has to do on this TV show, but also claiming he's doing it as some kind of public service is so nauseating it doesn't even bear thinking about. So if I were the cockroaches, I'd go scuttling away as soon as possible.
Christina and Ali, thank you so much for taking us through the papers. We'll see you in the next hour. Thank you.